Thank you very much. I begin by thanking the High Commissioner and Professor Smith for their contributions to the panel so far. I also thank the co-organisers of this conference for the kind invitation. Of course, I extend my thanks to Professor Emilianidis for chairing. The Macmillan Doctrine is a term I've coined and used in my writings and lectures over the last few years. As a term, the Macmillan Doctrine encapsulates the Cyprus-related purposes, principles, policies, phrases and procedures which were promoted by or on behalf of Harold Macmillan as Minister of Defence of the UK from 18th of October 1954 until 7th of April 1955, as Foreign Secretary from 7th of April until 20th of December 1955, as Chancellor of the Exchequer from 20th of December 1955 until 10th of January 1957, and as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 10th of January 1957 until 18th of October 1963. Coining the concept of the Macmillan Doctrine, I've proceeded from the premise that Macmillan has had a bigger long-term impact on the island of Cyprus, both before and after 1960, than all of the other British politicians of his generation, several of whom, like Macmillan himself, wore military uniform during the First World War, before being elected to the House of Commons after 1918, and thereafter holding ministerial office before, during, or after the Second World War. Anthony Eden, his predecessor, falls into this category as well. The conference affords me an opportunity to reassess the Macmillan Doctrine 70 years after it started to take shape in 1955, when Macmillan fell under the influence of Sir Ivone Kirkpatrick, the permanent Undersecretary in the Foreign Office, where he was serving as minister for a few months. But it really did crystallise as a set of ideas in 1958, when Macmillan presented the ill-fated Macmillan Plan, formerly known as an adventure partnership. The Macmillan Plan bit the dust, but the ideas and the philosophical tenets underpinning it were carried forward into what have come to be known as the Zurich and London Agreements of February 1959. On closer inspection, they have more precise titles, but I won't go into them today. I don't have time. The reassessment that I want to focus on concerns a question that was confronting Macmillan and other British ministers of the Crown during the 1950s, but is now at the very forefront of the political agenda and indeed the potential survival of the United Kingdom as a democratic society subject to the rule of law. The question is, how should the United Kingdom government not only protect, but more generally deal with a numerical minority of Muslims under a European island under British sovereignty? Now, that question was the question that the British faced in the 1950s in the context of the island of Cyprus. It's a question that they're now facing in the context of the island known as Great Britain, which consists of England, Wales, and Scotland, three of the four elements of the United Kingdom, Northern Ireland being the fourth. This is a question that would not have been asked in the context of the UK in the 50s, but it's a question that must be asked today. How did Macmillan address it? Well, he addressed it by coming up with a set of ideas, which I call the Macmillan Doctrine, which were influenced by previous generations of British politicians and civil servants, as well as diplomats. I've called it the Macmillan Doctrine. It really is an accumulation of ideas that various politicians put forth over the years. But boiled down to its bare essence, I would suggest that the Macmillan Doctrine contains of at least 5 components or tenets. The first tenet is what might be regarded as the primary purpose of British policy towards Cyprus. This is to safeguard British bases and installations. I'm using Macmillan's phraseology here, albeit at the price of preventing the proper application of the right or the right to self-determination or the principle of self-determination. Take your pick as to which you prefer. Now, this first tenet of the Macmillan Doctrine, in other words, safeguarding British bases and installations, eventually resulted in what I've taken to calling the camouflage partition of the island of Cyprus on the 16th of August 1960. That was a phrase I used in a review of Professor Emilianides' book on the negotiations leading up to 1960. The 1960 camouflage partition, as I called it. The British established the Republic of Cyprus in 97% of the island of Cyprus, but they clung on to two areas that they called sovereign areas, and they camouflaged the partition by using euphemisms such as the administrator instead of the governor, and by calling the border between the sovereign base areas and the Republic of Cyprus boundaries. But to all intents and purposes, there was a partition of the territory of the island of Cyprus on the 16th of August 1960, and that was very much an outcome of this first tenet of the Macmillan Doctrine. Another aspect of that was the retention of retained sites and installations in places such as Mount Olympus, which the British still cling on to today. The second tenet of the Macmillan Doctrine is inherently undemocratic. The High Commissioner earlier uttered the phrase that the Indians took from the US Constitution, "we the people," which harks back to the ancient Greek concept of the demos, the people. The second tenet of the Macmillan Doctrine is predicated on the Ottoman and Islamist segregation of people into Muslims and non-Muslims. When the British arrived in Cyprus, they inherited this form of segregation. But in the years after 1878, they actually entrenched it even further. So, for example, in the Cyprus Legislative Council made in Buckingham Palace on the 6th of August 1925, the British adapted what they had done in the past by segregating adult voters into non-Mohammedan persons, their phrase was not mine, on the one hand, and Mohammedan persons on the other. And with the passage of years, non-Mohammedan persons became Greek Cypriots and Mohammedan persons became Turkish Cypriots. These are all British colonial labels, which people still trot out today without realizing that they are colonial labels designed to promote the division and indeed the segregation of the people of Cyprus, and to dismantle and destroy the concept of the people. So that's the second tenet of the Macmillan Doctrine. The third tenet is what Alan Lennox Boyd, the Secretary of State for the Colonies from 1954 until 1959, characterized on the 26th of June 1958 as the policy of communal autonomy. So not only did the British perpetuate the Ottoman segregation of the people into Muslims and non-Muslims, what the British also did was they sought to instrumentalize and empower each of these two communities in various different ways through initially colonial legislation in the pre-1960 period, and then through the 1960 Constitution, which others drafted, albeit with the British lurking in the shadows. So how was this translated into practice? Well, it was translated into practice through the insertion of the term "the two communities" in at least 6 articles of the 1960 Constitution, and through various structures of segregation authorized by the 1960 Constitution, such as the president who must be Greek, the vice president who must be a Turk, Greek communal primary schools, Turkish communal primary schools, the Greek communal chamber, the Turkish communal chamber, the Greek electoral list, and the Turkish electoral list. These were structures of segregation that were in the 1960 Constitution, but they were consistent with the tenet of the Macmillan Doctrine known as the policy of communal autonomy. The fourth tenet of the Macmillan Doctrine is the principle of partnership. Now, what did Macmillan mean by this? Well, what he meant was, and this is his phraseology taken from his presentation of the Macmillan Plan on the 19th of June 1958 in the House of Commons. The principle of partnership means partnership between the communities in the island, there's that phrase again, communities, and between the governments of the UK, Greece and Turkey. So what this idea produced in the long term was not the Macmillan Plan, which bit the dust, but the 1959 Zurich London Agreements and the 1960 Constitution and the various treaties attached to that Constitution, which were predicated on this idea of partnership between the two communities in the what became the Republic of Cyprus and three external powers, Greece, Turkey, and the UK, two of whom, Turkey and the UK, were the two previous colonial rulers. So what the Macmillan Doctrine eventually did was not produce the decolonization of the island of Cyprus. It produced the recolonization through the retention of the sovereign base areas, the retention of sites and installations on the sovereign territory of the Republic of Cyprus, through Turkey acquiring rights that it never previously had in the post-1878, or rather post-1914, post-annexation period. And in addition, Greece were brought in as well to give this a veneer of respectability. The fifth tenet, and this is the last one I'll touch on, there are others, but the fifth main tenet of the Macmillan Doctrine is the procedure known as the Conference on Cyprus. This was applied for the first time from the 17th until the 19th of February 1959 at the Conference on Cyprus in London, where there were 5 parties, that representatives of the two communities, as they were called at the conference, on the one side, and representatives of Greece, Turkey, and the UK on the other side. Now, that concept of the 5-party conference on Cyprus has continued to live on into the post-1960 epoch. For example, in 2017, the United Nations convened a conference on Cyprus, initially in Geneva and later on elsewhere in Switzerland. And instead of inviting the Republic of Cyprus to attend as the Republic of Cyprus, as a UN member state, as a member of the Commonwealth, the Council of Europe, and the EU, the two leaders of the two communities, as the UN called them, were invited, and along with Greece, Turkey, and the UK, with the EU attending as a mere observer. The Macmillan Doctrine lives on through various means, but one is the concept of the 5-party conference on Cyprus. I'm conscious that I'm running out of time, so let me now go back to the question that I asked in the title of this presentation. Has the Macmillan Doctrine served the democratic values and long-term interests of the United Kingdom? Well, on the one hand, there's no doubt that Macmillan cut a deal, he implemented the deal, he brought the ＥΟΚΑ campaign to an end, and he was able to bask in the glow of the London Agreement, and he managed to win the general election held a few months after the London Agreement, and he was able to serve a full term, or almost a full term, because he resigned shortly before the 1964 general election. But he was able to bask in the glow of that agreement, and today, in the year 2025, the United Kingdom continues to cling on to its 2 sovereign base areas. It may have surrendered some of the sites and installations, but it still clings on to Mount Olympus, for example. So in one sense, the Macmillan Doctrine has produced a long-term benefit to the United Kingdom. But I'm going to end on a rather somber and indeed dark note, by suggesting that the Macmillan Plan casts a shadow over the present in the United Kingdom. The irony is that today, in the year 2025, and I regret to say this because I'm a UK citizen as well as a Republic of Cyprus citizen, today in the year 2025, the United Kingdom is facing the sort of tensions and pressures and divisions and potential conflict that the island of Cyprus faced both before and after the establishment of the Republic of Cyprus in 1960. We are seeing increasing, well, I'm going to use Cypriot phraseology, increasing intercommunal tensions, increasing pressure on the government to clamp down on those intercommunal tensions, accusations that the government is engaged in unfair practices that favour one side as distinct from the other. And perhaps most worryingly of all, we're seeing the emergence of what some would consider to be parallel societies and potentially worse. So the issue that I want to close with, is that this conference is timely. The history of the island of Cyprus during the 1950s is of critical importance for us understanding what happened during the 1950s. But I would go further and suggest to you that what happened in Cyprus during the 1950s, and more especially what went wrong during the 1950s from the standpoint of the UK, is of enormous relevance to what is happening in the UK today. Because what we need to try and do is prevent the United Kingdom collapsing into the sort of anarchy, violence, and constitutional turmoil that the Republic of Cyprus fell into after 1960. I thank you for your time.